Chloé Zhao's Hamnet is definitely a film about grief. However, suffering does not unfold as a narrative problem to be resolved, but rather as a wound that resists closure. This resistance is what allows theatre to become the expression of Shakespeare's grief in a way nothing else could. For Theodor Adorno, art gives voice to suffering precisely by refusing to reconcile it. Authentic art does not console, it preserves the reality of pain without transforming it into false harmony. In this sense, Hamnet does not simply depict grief, it allows suffering to speak through its silences and absences. Careful, spoilers ahead. Adorno believed that suffering creates a demand for expression, yet ordinary language often fails in the face of profound loss. Conceptual language tends to organize, explain, and thereby neutralize suffering. In Hamnet, grief appears most powerfully not in moments of speech, but in moments where speech collapses. Agnes' silence is not emptiness but expression. Her inability to articulate her loss becomes itself the form through which loss is communicated. Cinematically, this is evident in the film's attention to absence. After Hamnet's death, the camera lingers on spaces that remain materially intact yet perceptually altered. A bed, a doorway, a piece of clothing, these objects do not function as symbolic substitutes for the lost child, rather they testify to his absence. Adorno argued that art, by contrast, can express what cannot be fully articulated. It gives voice to suffering by presenting the traces of what has been destroyed, without pretending that these traces restored what was lost. The persistence of these spaces reveals loss not as a past event, but as an ongoing condition. Suffering continues to inhabit the present. For Shakespeare, theatre becomes the way through which this suffering can exist. Hamnet's death will forever exist in the shape of Hamlet, and in this way grief can survive without destroying those who are still alive. Even the choice of the name of the play, Hamlet, a resemblance to Hamnet, reinforces the fact that even though traces of Hamlet are expressed, they cannot and should not restore his existence. The film also shows that through art's way of expressing grief, a deeper form of solidarity can happen. Agnes and Shakespeare's relationship becomes strained after Hamlet's death, as she seems to believe he is not suffering, at least not in the same way she is. When she watches the play, Agnes can sense Shakespeare's pain for the first time, realizing that suffering was just expressed differently. This happens because, as Adorno argues, when art expresses suffering authentically, it interrupts indifference. It forces the viewer or listener to confront what is often suppressed. This confrontation opens a space for ethical awareness. We recognize vulnerability, and that brings us closer. It is through Shakespeare's artistic expression of his grief that Agnes and the entire audience in the theatre actually can relate to him, and some form of understanding seems to happen. The film thus aligns with Adorno's conviction that art speaks most truthfully where direct communication fails. The film also resists narrative closure. There is no moment in which grief is overcome or redeemed. This refusal reflects Adorno's rejection of what he called false reconciliation, the tendency of cultural forms to impose meaning or resolution on suffering in order to make it bearable. For Adorno, such reconciliation falsifies the reality of pain. In Hamnet, grief remains unresolved. Neither Agnes nor Shakespeare return to who they were before. The film preserves the irreversibility of loss, allowing suffering to remain visible rather than absorbed into a conforming narrative. This ethical stance is inseparable from the film's formal qualities. The pacing is slow, even suspended, as if time itself has been damaged. Adorno saw modern art's fragmentation and dissonance as expressions of historical and existential suffering. The film's form becomes the medium through which suffering is expressed. In this way, Hamnet, being a form of art itself, plays with metalinguistics, as the film, like the theatre within the narrative, becomes another artistic expression of grief. For Adorno, art gives voice to suffering not by speaking about it directly, but by embodying its contradictions. Hamnet expresses grief through its tension between presence and absence, visibility and invisibility, silence and expression. The film does not explain grief, nor does it offer redemption. Instead, it creates a space in which suffering can appear without distortion. In doing so, it fulfills what Adorno saw as art's most profound ethical task, to bear witness to suffering without betraying it. In Hamnet, grief finds its voice not in words, but in the fragile persistence of what remains. Art does not heal the wound, it makes the wound visible, and in that visibility, suffering is finally allowed to speak. Thank you for watching this video. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you want to keep track of other videos. Don't hesitate to leave a comment or to contact me if you want to know more. See you next time!